Hello everybody, and welcome to today's webcast, Implementing Microsoft Power BI. My name is Ben Dunmire, and I'm a Business Intelligence and Analytics Consultant here at Thorogood, based in our Philadelphia office. Before we jump into Power BI, I'll briefly introduce Thorogood and what we do. So for those of you who don't know us, we're an independent global professional services firm specializing in business intelligence, analytics, strategies, solutions, and services with a focus on our customers. We are a global company with offices in New York, Philadelphia, London, Bangalore, India, Singapore, and Sao Paulo, Brazil. All our consultants are recruited and trained in the same way to develop a unique mix of skills, blending business understanding in the form of industry and functional experience with strong technical aptitude and a deep understanding of analytical tools and techniques. We do offer a full range of BI analytics services, including strategy and roadmaps, requirements, design, implementation, and training and support. In terms of the technologies we work with, we are an independent consultant firm, meaning we don't work with one specific technology. We do, however, work and partner with many of the key players in the market in order to provide our clients with the solution that best suits their needs. Today we're talking about Power BI, but our strategies for implementing and governing Power BI have been learned across various tools. And we have been a Microsoft Gold partner for over 15 years and are certified for data analytics, data platform, and cloud platform. So let's get started and kind of looking at a high level why organizations are turning to Power BI. So we have seen huge interest in the tool from our customers looking to adopt a self-service reporting and analytic platform. And here I've distilled down a few of the key aspects of Power BI and why organizations are investing in the tool. So it enables self-service analytics, has an attractive pricing model, it's constantly evolving and growing as a software tool, and it fosters the ability to collaborate and share data insights. These are all opportunities that Power BI presents, but without a supportive strategy to implement and govern the tool, it's difficult to achieve the maximum value and really take advantage of the opportunity from these benefits. So a bit more on each of these. Power BI offers an impressive option to visualize and analyze data to identify insights. It also possesses quite a few capabilities that lend themselves to support self-serve and if implemented and enforced effectively. Microsoft's pricing model is well suited for enterprise organizations and allows for flexibility depending on how the tool is positioned and planned to be used by the user community. The desktop tool sees monthly updates with new functionalities and connections to new data sources, and the cloud-based service inherently sees frequent updates to improve its performance, user interface, customization, so users are constantly able to do new and innovative things. And the true value really and impact from Power BI is experienced when an organization is able to create and foster an environment where information can be shared and collaborated on in a well-defined forum. So this list isn't meant to be cumulative, but it gives a sense of the opportunity to generate value with Power BI. So here I'd like to quickly think about the need for organizational continuity and balance when it comes to Power BI. Influencing everything and providing direction is organizational data strategy, which sets technology direction, highlights key business needs, and sets guiding principles for data. Within that, we find something like an IT function, which is responsible for enabling the rest of the organization and setting guidelines for the use of technology. And particularly now, where data is kind of everywhere and created by business teams, we need a self-service strategy that is influenced by tool governance and overall data direction, but really designed specifically for the user community in mind. And at the core of my depiction here is empowered and focused individuals, which is really the foundation of any organization. And we can see that they're influenced by everything above it, and if done right, we'll have a ton of support and facilitation for them to drive value, specifically with Power BI. So that's kind of a bit about strategy and kind of approach. I'd like to talk about kind of some specific areas that we're seeing with Power BI. We're able to kind of implement some strategies or some processes that can really kind of make the tool valuable. So I'll start off with kind of covering a wide array of relevant topics that I've seen and others have seen, and they're really areas or decisions where the Power BI design can be adjusted or manipulated for a successful implementation. First, we have DevOps. So this is finding ways to automate the management of Power BI and the management of Power BI infrastructure, and ultimately making development and time to production simpler and more efficient. Performance monitoring is pretty specific to premium capacity, but it's recognizing where infrastructure might not be meeting user needs and user demands and the demands of what data and reports exist. Usage and admin reporting, which is actually a pretty wide lens, but really it's looking at ways that we can extract insights from things like user access, audit data, sharing details, and similar things like that, which you can then make informed decisions and changes off of to essentially improve the implementation. Code management, and that's really an important aspect of any technical data implementation, and actually one that's generally pretty tough for visualization and modeling tools, so I'll talk a bit about it later. style templates and development standards, so probably a big subset of bullets underneath of this, but in one respect, organizations are developing templates with color palettes, fonts, common headers, et cetera, in Power BI just to have a common design pattern, and also thinking about playbooks for best practices, both in the modeling side, so schema design, naming conventions, and also in the front-end design, so visualizations, look and feel, things like that. Workspace Design, which really focuses on how users interact with the cloud service, how your community is generating and then using that content, how you're able to discover and use Power BI insights. Data flows, so part of Microsoft vision for, I think, expanding the Power BI and Power Platform data processing capabilities and integrating with something like a data lake are data flows, which is an opportunity to kind of bring together master data, organizational data, and also drive self-serve use cases. Another opportunity with Power BI is to extend it with Microsoft Flow or Microsoft Power Apps, both of which are kind of workflow and business process offerings. They do offer some pretty compelling and actually quickly developing functionalities. One example I think of is setting up some alerts on a Power BI dashboard where if a certain threshold is met, you could send an email, update a SharePoint list, enter data in a database, and do any number of other integration activities, which kind of takes a Power BI report or data visualization and makes it actionable. I have here responsive security and licensing, and this really looks at the processes or strategies that can make the administration of user permissions and data access quick to respond and efficient. So you certainly don't want, you want your information and data to be secure, but you don't want that to get in the way of working with agility or kind of promoting self-serve or data investigation. So sharing and collaboration, a broad term, but ultimately the measure of if Power BI is being effective, and are you able to share insights and collaborate on data to drive value. Here, you might be thinking about internal marketing events like an event, a meetup, a forum, or something maybe a bit more technical like a global report catalog where you catalog and categorize all reports that exist and content that exists in Power BI. So thinking about ways to improve that collaboration and sharing capability. Data source management, so looking at enterprise data gateways, data security, data classification for private and confidential data, and maybe on Power BI side, how you're organizing different data sets and maybe integrating with data dictionaries. And then segregation of duties, which kind of exists across different terms. Here for Power BI, thinking about having a clear set of roles and responsibilities for all the things that go into implementing Power BI. Who's responsible for gateways, who provides access, who's assessing if data security and privacy needs to be considered for a data set. So all those things kind of come together and need to be flushed out. The idea here is really just to give a view of all the different things that might go into Power BI implementation. I'll take the next half of the presentation to dive into some of these and show some actual examples of how you might implement it, how you might do it. So we'll start with DevOps here, and at its core, DevOps is a set of strategies started in software development actually that have been adopted for data systems. And for Power BI, we look at opportunities to increase productivity, reduce the time to production, and while also introducing some automation that makes things easier for developers and for administrators and for users. Ultimately, we want DevOps to be make us more responsive to change and better at adapting. So first I'll mention the Power BI REST APIs, which have been developed based on the existing resource and admin functionality that are native to Power BI. You can see the list of API modules here. I won't go through these in detail, but you can see the things that are more akin to administrator, so capacities, users, and then stuff that's more developer of interest, capabilities around reports, data sets, and similar to that, Microsoft has also developed a set of PowerShell modules which perform the same sorts of activities, but are written obviously in PowerShell syntax. So you can see the list of modules here is a bit leaner, but covers some of the core areas of Power BI automation. And really the decision here is maybe where capability lies, where existing infrastructure lies to maybe use APIs or use PowerShell. So both of these are actually fairly new, and you certainly expect them to continue to grow and evolve over time, particularly with a massive push for infrastructure as code management in the landscape. So you can see Microsoft is looking for ways to enable folks to use APIs or PowerShell to manage Power BI. And I think it's a pretty important step to using DevOps for Power BI. So I thought I'd show a bit of a simple example of what a simple deployment might look like using DevOps. And this is pretty abstract, but thought I would contextualize how DevOps might help us. So let's say we have a Power BI desktop user, someone who's generating content pretty frequently. They want to share things that they're creating with the community. Think of them as something like a power user. And the organization has a Power BI service set up, and within that we have a development, dev, QA, and a production, workspace, or capacity, whichever one doesn't really matter for my example here. But we have each of those set up, and the user has the ability to interact and knows how those come together. So it is really be easy and straightforward to kind of just deploy from a desktop report. You'd expect the user to kind of deploy right to the dev environment just from their desktop app, so it's really the click of a button. And then they can do their smoke testing, make sure things look right, validate their data. From there, they really want to use either themselves or use some type of service or application to send an API call or run a PowerShell command that will then move the application from dev to the QA environment or the QA workspace in this example. What are the activities that go into this? You deploy the report, so pick up the report and move it from one place to another in Power BI. In this case, let's assume that the data set hasn't changed, it's just front end changes, so we'll assign to the QA data set, and then we'll just refresh the data set just to validate it. A few commands will essentially allow us to have the QA reports in the right location. And here, testers can come in, users can come in to look at it and validate it. We'll do the same type of thing to get to production, so whether it's an application, a service, or the user themselves instigating some calls, and that'll move the report from QA to production, just like any type of kind of data movement or deployment protocol that you can think of. Moving to production, it might be a bit complicated. It might be a few more steps that we can theorize here. So maybe we have some type of approval. Maybe it's an email. Maybe it's some type of standard ticket that needs to be generated and approved. Then we move the report to production. We assign to the appropriate data set. We refresh that data set just to validate, and then maybe we want to update the refresh schedule, or maybe we just need to set it all together. So we can do all those kinds of things and do them programmatically instead of relying on a person or an administrator to go in and manually do it, wherein you're managing communication, you're managing email threads and things like that. And here we have the reports, the data sets, a refresh schedule all set up in production, and it's ready to be used by the community. Just some kind of considerations, things that come to mind. Since this is kind of API calls, PowerShell, it is possible to really integrate with a CI/CD tool, maybe something like Azure DevOps. There's quite a few many tools out there that might be possible to integrate with. And something I was thinking about and important to call out is Power BI is a self-service tool, so you don't really want the automation or the requirements to automate deployments to get in the way of self-service. So I think there's a balance to be struck between the ability to support and actually use the automation setup, and also to work with agility and work with flexibility. So certainly something to think about as compared to some other software development initiatives. Then I mentioned this, you'd have to expect the API PowerShell capabilities to continue to grow and expand over time as Microsoft invests in them. We talked a little bit about DevOps. An important component of DevOps is actually the ability to manage code effectively and have maybe some version control practices in place. So here I'd like to talk about that a little bit. And for the purposes of source control, both during development and a normal run cadence, we do think of Power BI files at the moment as kind of editable documents, so a Word document, a PowerPoint presentation. Since we don't really have the capability of using some robust code management like analysis services solutions or database solutions, you do have to be, I think, pretty targeted and strategic about the practices you put in place for Power BI code management. You really want to put things in place that are meant to help teams collaborate and communicate without being a burden on them and have unnecessary controls. So you also want to be able to effectively manage change and be responsive, which ultimately is the point of Power BI in one case. So what I've done here is just kind of come up with an example folder structure. It seems very simple, but this is a way where we can kind of orient a Team Foundation server or Git, a code repository, to have some type of governance over it that ultimately helps us to use Power BI and implement Power BI. So at the top level, you might orient by business segment. So there's some very high-level segmentations. It might be a bit detailed. I've just put some generic opportunities up here. At the next level, you might have the Power BI solution. So within a solution, I think you might have multiple reports, multiple dashboards, multiple data sets, something that can be kind of logically organized for a shared objective, a shared reason that you are putting these things together, and just some logical way to group them. And next, and something we might integrate with like CI/CD pipelines, is our environment subfolder. So here we might store versions that are current deployment or have been set up for different environments. And maybe you don't have CI/CD set up and you're just using this as a way to have a version for each environment and know what that version is. Within this, despite a single file type, you might have multiple different things that Power BI files are meant for, and it might be worth adding some distinction. So, is something just a data model, a data set? Is something just visualizations? Do you just have some templates? So adding a bit of distinction as to what is this Power BI file, why am I using it, what purpose is it serving? And then lastly, you might, despite version controls, tools doing version control, you might want to archive and show and separate the current and archive version just to maintain some specific versions over time. So kind of simple idea here of just implementing some folder patterns to use, but I think can really help to use Power BI to work quickly and to produce some interesting information. Just some kind of themes and considerations to call out. You are able to use native functionalities of source control tools, so I think of seeing when something is being altered or being edited at the moment, so you're avoiding overwrites. I think this does really help, and if it can unify, it's the transition of knowledge and the ability to share. So if everybody is organizing their code in the same way, their code content, it's a bit easier to move between teams or to share information between teams, something which you can get a lot of value out of, and something I think is often pretty difficult. Obviously, you can implement some controls on, code classes and duplicating efforts. And I mentioned having a template with maybe an organizational theme, a color palette, a source control tab, different things that you can use that teams can then pick up and have some standards around that they can kind of have some coalesce and some consistency. Kind of we'll transition here. In addition to kind of managing actual development and deployment of files, we can also think about how managing code can introduce ways to kind of adjust how we use Power BI, how we implement it. So I'll actually go through an example here that's proven pretty effective for introducing governance to manage data sets, and actually helps in streamlining some activities. So for this example, I'm really looking at areas where IT-owned or very managed data solutions exist. So, reports that the data set has been validated, it's been tested, it's been integrated, it is confirmed in a source of data, where a lot of people are wanting to then use that data to report off of it. So the idea really is to separate that data set in Power BI from itself, its data set, and then from visualization reports. And ultimately, you're opening up some windows to develop and create reports a bit quicker, and you're also kind of applying that governance over data that is often required and really desired in a lot of organizations. So in the example, I have a power user, a developer, someone who's familiar with data. They generate a pretty robust data model in Power BI data set, deploy it to the service. So they're able to kind of validate and test this model and make it available to an audience. And from here, we have a couple different teams or even individuals that are keen to use this data. So they are wanting to analyze and use this data for the different reporting needs, whether they're standard reporting, whether they're doing a bit of investigation. And each of them are going to develop their own report, their own set of visualizations. They probably have a shared kind of objective, but their different reports are doing different things. So you really want to generate 3 separate reports with 3 separate data models that are probably about the same, but might have key differences that can really lead to confusion. So what we can do instead is have each of these individuals or teams connect to a single source, a Power BI data set to be specific, and then build their reports off of this. So here they're not worrying about managing the data. They are connecting to something that is managed, that exists, and then they're just building their front-end visualizations. And you can just, in Power BI, you can connect directly to Power BI data sets which have been provisioned. So it's an interesting option that we can deploy a data set and then use it for reporting, and we don't have to worry about teams being responsible for modeling data when that might be a capability that it can be lacking. So some advantages of this, certainly it presents the ability to govern and manage data sets, and you can also optimize efficiencies in having multiple data sets that exist. It does, in cases, create a bottleneck depending on how it's being used. It's not necessarily a great self-serve model in all cases, depending on how quickly and how frequently the data model needs to change. There are also limitations with Power BI technically, so you can't add another data source in when using a Power BI data set, and you might not be able to add some measures and calculated columns and adjust the model like that. But I think an interesting opportunity to really, for IT-owned things to consider. I'll shift focus a little bit here and talk about Workspace Design, and this kind of builds off what we were just talking about, like how do you integrate and use the Power BI service to best effect. And ultimately what I'm thinking about here is how organizations are organizing their Power BI content and thinking about the lens that users and people are going to use it. So, if something is disjointed, confusing, disorganized, it can lead to a lack of control, loss of confidence, lack of accountability, really. With our Workspace Design, we're kind of thinking 2 components: premium capacity, which is more the infrastructure side, and app workspaces, which is more the organizational side of it. So Power BI Premium is essentially dedicated capacity nodes that are used for computation and storage. So it's not a requirement to use Power BI by any means, but it is kind of the enterprise option to kind of dedicate space that is used for your Power BI and your Power BI only. And the capacity choice, the sizing, depends on quite a number of things. The requirements, number of reports, size of data, amount of query usage, as well as enterprise agreements all come into play as determining, what is the premium capacity I need or we need. Then the other side, app workspaces, which certainly integrate and work with premium capacity, but they're essentially logical containers where Power BI content can be developed, where it can be tested, where it can be worked on, and then where it can be made available via an app to a directed audience. So premium apps are places where the entire organization comes to look at information, and the workspace is where people kind of work on and develop their content. And I think a key is really to establishing an intuitive and a consistent pattern for the Power BI ecosystem, which can be really, really valuable. So I just have a simple example here of what I'm trying to explain. Ultimately, it depends on maybe how your organization is laid out, how you want to use Power BI, but this example should kind of show what things you might be thinking about in setting up your workspace. So we have Power BI service, and in a lot of cases, you might have multiple capacities. So I've laid out 3 here. You might only have 2. You might have 4. You might have multiple. Maybe it's segmented by company or something like that. But let's say we just have a simple dev, QA, and production capacity, which are sized appropriately. Maybe production is quite a bit stronger. Within that, and I'll start over here at Dev, we have multiple workspaces, and this is just an example. Of course, you'd have quite a number of workspaces, but really you'd like to have some consistency and some patterns to this. You'd like these workspaces to be at a similar granularity. We don't want very, very detailed and very, very high-level things. You'd like them to recognize a common level and use it from there. So, and here I've laid out a couple examples of how you might organize and segment your business by maybe segments or something like that. And then you would, of course, replicate this in QA and production. So you have that consistency going from all your capacities, and users, no matter where they're going, are able to see something kind of familiar. A bit of a tweak on this, instead of thinking about like business segment, business functions, I'm going to be thinking more tactically about like Power BI. So what are my Power BI solutions that exist? So I might have a number of different parallels or verticals, I should say, of solutions, and I might instead create workspaces for each of those solutions. So it's the same granularity across the board. So I have consistency, and I'm able to point people where I need to point people. Just thinking a bit about how we can introduce some simple controls into our workspace, govern it, and go from there. So we'll talk about data flows pretty quickly here. So data flows with Power BI kind of having the reporting, analytic, data exploration abilities. Like we are looking for ways to make source data much more accessible, and data flows are kind of an opportunity to surface that source data really and make it available for modeling and reporting. You do have to think about existing data stores, data lakes, security, governance, and things like that. But data flows are an interesting proposition that is being kind of considered by some organizations. With that, I'll show a bit of an example of where we see data flows maybe fitting in. So in a traditional approach for Power BI, we have a number of different sources, and from there we'll do some transformation, some ETL, and we'll develop a Power BI data set, so a data model in Power BI that is kind of fully tested and ready to use and has its integrity. And off this we'll have reports, one or many reports. From here we'll probably have users requesting more data, requesting more information. I'd really like additional data sets, more columns, more tables to be added. So our normal practice is to go and change that data set, add those tables, add those columns, and then it happens again and again. And we're continually adding and adjusting and branching off this singular data set. A kind of way to combat this or kind of approach this is maybe with Power BI data flows. We have the same sources. Instead of feeding though a Power BI data set, so a model, right, a relational model, we are feeding kind of data flows, which for all intents and purposes are kind of model tables. So we're still able to do transformation, apply ETL, and then produce basically data flows or tables, which are modeled, and they're able to be used by users for any type of need. And from here, we'd have like some power users or people that are able to connect with these data flows, basically connecting to like a table and generating their data sets from that information. So there might be a set of data flows, a set of tables that are kind of common and used amongst many people, but they have different tweaks of it. So you might have someone that's more interested in marketing, somebody more interested in currency, someone more interested in sales. They're able to tweak those data sets off a kind of managed source data, but kind of build it to their needs. So I do think like technical power users best fit this, and you do sacrifice certainly some governance with this approach, but I think maybe a balance between kind of the traditional approach of managed data sets and changing them with the use of data flows for maybe introducing some more self-serve cases is pretty compelling and interesting. I'll talk here about implementing Power BI for performance monitoring specifically. With the use of Power BI Premium, you kind of have a need to monitor performance and make informed decisions about infrastructure. Is it sized appropriately? Has it been set up in a way that best empowers and uses can be used by my organization? So things I'm thinking about, memory and CPU utilization, data set sizes and frequency of refreshes, and the time of refreshes really for your performance. So if something is slow to respond, people aren't getting data, they're not going to use it. And then some other components. So in Power BI, we kind of have 2 offerings at the moment. One is kind of built into the admin portal. So as a Power BI admin, you can go to the portal and see some inbuilt diagnostics about premium capacity, how it's set up, kind of how it's stacking up against what you've kind of paid for, what you've allotted, and here you can get some pretty quick statistics. A bit more detailed and granular approach is actually to use an app that Microsoft has produced and curated, which contains a dashboard, report, and data set. It's called Power BI Premium Capacity Metrics. And to get it, you can go to the App Source. You can see the app here. You can get the app. It'll automatically connect to your premium interface, premium tiers, and it kind of has inbuilt, immediately ready for consumption, a dashboard, report, and data set, which is a lot of interesting information. And the challenge really is going to this, figuring out what's important, what do I need from this. And then it's actually able to customize this quite a bit more, where we're able to actually use that data set and build our own report. So I could take the data set and build something that's interesting to me off of it. So it's a pretty interesting way, and an important thing to start looking into is how we're monitoring premium performance. And the last item I'll cover here pretty quickly is usage and admin metric reporting. So in the same way as performance monitoring, there's some inbuilt functionalities in the admin portal. So I can get some metrics about, as an admin, about usage. So who's using dashboards, who's using reports, who's using data. I can get pretty quick intelligence about what's happening. Users can actually also generate their own ad hoc usage reports for any report or dashboard they have access to, which can be pretty interesting for teams that are kind of getting going and wanting to see how their reports are doing. Something that's a bit more technical, a bit deeper, is actually leveraging Office 365 audit logs, and obviously this was predicated on having Office 365. But here we're able to get information about user access, about content sharing, licensing, gateway usage, all these different things that Office 365 captures. We're able to leverage those specifically for Power BI kind of metrics. And it can be really valuable to see, pro users that aren't using their license effectively or aren't using it at all, who's sharing a ton of content, do we have some security risks out there? And the approach really is to, at the moment, build PowerShell scripts to extract Office 365 audit data. And you can also think about Microsoft Graph API, which is up and coming. And then that information can be stored in a data mart or something like that and reported off of. That's really a comprehensive look at some of the details that I wanted to cover in terms of implementing Power BI. And, I mentioned earlier a number of different topics which are interesting. I'll quickly just close out here with a bit of a summary. I think a theme that we've recognized today is how kind of organizational strategy really integrates and overlaps with, tool or kind of specific strategies. So we have tools, what are the technology available? We have a ton of data. We have people that want to use this data, want to use these tools, want to, uncover insights that make them more effective. And then we have a lot of processes that enable us to do it. And this all feeds into like a Power BI strategy, something specific for Power BI. So I won't go into these in detail, but we're thinking about, how is the technology used, how is it implemented, how is it governed, how is data made accessible, how do we promote it and support it in our organization. And really, you want this kind of self-service strategy for Power BI to feed back into your organizational strategy. Do you need to think about investing more in DevOps? Do you need to think about more training? Do you need to think about how you're making data accessible in a data lake or relational data mart? So it's a really interesting dynamic, I find, to think about how kind of organizational strategies can relate and integrate and kind of influence, just see parallels with self-service kind of specific strategies. So it's pretty interesting to call it, and I think a theme that we kind of uncovered today. Thank you very much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.